Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. In this episode of Blazor Train, I'll show you how to handle the sitch where you push a new version of a Blazor server, WebAssembly, or WebAssembly PWA app to production, and you need to handle the update gracefully for the peeps currently using your app. Each of these three app types need to employ different strategies for handling the update. I've done some research into how people are making it work, and I'm going to share that with you right now, right here on Blazor Train. All right, as Carl said, we're going to do this three ways. First, Blazor server, then Blazor WebAssembly, and then Blazor WebAssembly PWA, Progressive Web Application. Each of these three models, we handle things a little bit differently. But we're starting with Blazor server, and that's where I've got this project called Update Reload Server. For all three of these demos, we'll be publishing to an Azure App Service so that we can do an update and see how our apps behave. So the first thing I'm going to do is in _host CS_HTML, and I'm going to change render mode from server pre-rendered to just server. The reason is we're going to be doing some JavaScript, and JavaScript doesn't work in the pre-rendering state. So the very first time you can call JavaScript is when the life cycle on after rendered happens. So just take it from me. It's not going to work with Blazor server unless you turn off pre-rendering. So before we do anything else, I want to publish this to Azure just so that you can see what happens by default when you publish a new version or you update the application or the application restarts in Azure. So I've created my profile and I'm going to hit the publish button. So there it is. Now I'm going to bring up another browser right next to it, and I'm going to hit the publish button again. All right, and let's see what happens over here. So it's going to publish to this browser because that one has focus. But notice what's going on over here in the one that's already running. All right, so it loads over here. And now what happens is we get this message, could not reconnect to the server, reload the page to restore functionality. So this is the default behavior. It's not going to automatically reload for you. So wouldn't it be cool if it did? We need something that can watch for this reload button here in this modal and automatically push the button or automatically reload. So that's what we're going to do. So back in _host, we're going to add the following script. Now let's check this out. The mutation observer, it's a built-in object that observes a DOM element it watches, and it fires a callback when there's a change. Right? So we don't really care about what the changes are, but we do want access to this observer. So we're looking for this particular modal. This is essentially showing us the reload button. So we wait for that reload. We have our method attempt reload. So then we have some code in a try catch that calls fetch and location.reload. Now before that happens, before we call that, we're going to disconnect the observer because we don't want to be continuing to watch this. We've got our situation where that modal is up there. So then we're going to call attempt reload, and every second we're going to continue calling attempt reload. So this is kind of a cool little feature that somebody wrote on the internet. I think it was on Stack Overflow. It's a nice little way to push that button, well, reload automatically when we see that change. So I've got my update reload server here. I'm going to pull up a new window because we want to watch what happens in both windows. And then I'll publish again. So the new one's going to be published over here because it has focus. But let's watch and see what happens over here. Watch for reload. There's reload. Nothing happened. Why? Well, because we didn't have the mutation observer watching, but it is watching now. So if I reload this once and then go back and publish again, now the mutation observer is watching over here. All right, we have our new version here. So watch for the reload button over here. There it is, boom, and it reloads. So that's good. That's step one. Now we have to deal with the state. Well, it turns out state has already been covered in episode 17, persisting application state. But for the purposes of this demo, let's take over the counter page. What I want to happen is every time I update the counter, I want to save that count to protected storage in the browser. Protected meaning encrypted. And it's built into .NET 5 right now, so it's really cool. It's easy to do. Then when counter loads in onInitialized async, we're going to read that state and set the counter. So the combination of this mutation observer and some state management, and boom, we can go right back where we were. All right. So here we're using Microsoft ASP.NET Core Component Server protected browser storage, and we're injecting a protected session storage right there, protected session store. So with local storage, if it's not protected, whatever values you persist to local storage are going to be sent down to the browser in clear text. So anybody can just read them. And we don't want that. We want it encrypted. Especially because, this is Blazor server, right? I mean, it's not like in WebAssembly where everything's just in one place and we can just store it, right? There's no network traffic going on where opportunities for sniffing. So we're going to use this protected session store simply like this. When we increment the count, we've changed this to an async increment count. And this is right out of Steve Sanderson's demo, by the way, which I'll link somehow. Oh, there it is. Protected session store set async. Here's the key to a dictionary. Think of it like that. And we'll save current count. Now when we reload, we're going to get async count and read that number. And we just have some checking here with nulls. If the result is null, we'll set the current count to 0. Otherwise, we'll set it to the result. Now, let's publish once. Now, there's no state management in here, so it's just going to reload. Okay. So now the state management is in there. So now when I click the counter, now it's persisting to that protected storage. All right, let's publish again. Notice that the counter is 6. And it's still 6, but this is a new version. Cool, huh? So that is how it works in Blazor Server. Update and manage state. And I encourage you to go back to episode 17, persisting app state. We're going to use some of that code coming right up. All right, let's move on to WebAssembly. So I've got a hosted WebAssembly project here, a solution, update, reload, WASM. So got a server, got a client, and got a shared. We're going to start with a controller because, yes, we're going to call into an API controller to get the latest version as far as the server knows. So the API controller is going to look at configuration and we'll have the version number in the app settings. Let's do that now. There it is, app version 1.0. So now we just need a controller that can read that and return the version. And here it is. It's very simple. We're injecting configuration here. And we're going to use that configuration in the get to read app version, which is a string. So it's just going to come back 1.0 the first time. All right, let's take over index razor and start at the bottom. On initialized async, we're going to try to get the version from the API. And we need to wrap it in a try catch because we could be offline. Remember, WebAssembly applications can work offline. We might not have internet connectivity. So I have this version here, this string, which we've initialized to an empty string. Up here in the code, if it's not an empty string, we're going to say version, just so we know what the version of the server is. Now I've got this timer, version check timer, which I've set to elapse every 5 seconds. Now you can set it to whatever you want. You decide how often ET wants to phone home. 5 seconds is good for a demo. Maybe you want it to be a minute. Maybe you want 5 minutes. I guess that's up to you. So now we have this timer elapsed method, and of course we start the timer right away. And here we're calling get version asynchronously, and get version is going to call the API get version and compare that to the version that we got when we started the application. And if they're different, I've set this Boolean to true, new version available, and push to state has changed so that things can update. So when the state changes, if a new version is available, we're going to show, hey, there's a new version, and the update button. Update button is going to call update, which is going to call some JavaScript update. So let's add that JavaScript. Very simply, location.reload. All right, whatever our page is, we're going to reload it. So I've got my published profile. Let's just publish it. There we go, version 1.0. Now, let's change it. Let's change the configuration to 1.1. And we'll also put something different in the page so that we know the page is updated. Hello 1.1. And now let's republish it. Aha. Okay, so hello 1.1 over here, version 1.1. Now my WebAssembly application on this side says there's a new version available. And when we update, hello 1.1. So there are two problems here. One is obviously the state. We have to deal with that differently than we did with Blazor Server. We'll come back to that. And the second one is that our checking code is only in the home page, and there's 3 pages here. So if I'm on another page and we're not checking to see if we have new versions, let me demonstrate that. Let's change this to 1.2, and in our index we'll say hello 1.2 so that we know that this is the new version, and we'll publish an update. Over here, I'm going to go to counter. And yeah, might as well demonstrate both of those things. Let's give it some state that it's currently not saving. And over here is where we're going to publish the new one in the browser that has focus. Right? Where 1.2 over here, nothing happens over here because that checking happened on the home page. So now what happens is the home page shows 1.2 on the server, but it's still 1.1, like that timer isn't happening. So if I reload this, of course, everything's right. So what we're going to have to do is move the checking out of the index page, and let's make a toolbar. So instead of this about thing up top, we'll make a toolbar component as we did before in episode 17. Let's add a toolbar to the shared folder in our client. All right, so all of this stuff that I had in index is here, except I'm not showing the version number and all of that stuff. In fact, I'm going to change my index razor to just, hello 1.3. Now let's change our main layout. Instead of showing this about link, we'll just show the toolbar. All right, going back to the toolbar. Everything's pretty much the same, but what's good about this is that it's happening for every page, right? Because now it's part of the main layout. It's always across the top. So this will tell us when we have a new version available and we'll update it. We're going to use what's on the index to show us what version we're currently running. So we'll go to app settings JSON, we'll change it to 1.3, and we'll push a new update. So 1.3 over here. Now we have to update it, so we can update it here, but now we've got the toolbar over here instead of the about, right? So let's make one more update, 1.4. And now I'm going to go over to the counter page. And I'll just do some stuff. Now we don't have the state in there yet, but we can go to any page we want. That's the whole point. All right. Now there's a new version available right here, and I'm on the counter page. So no matter what page I'm on, I get the opportunity to update. And really all this is doing is reloading, right? Okay. Now if I go back, you can see it's 1.4. Okay, now let's talk about state, because in a Blazor server application, great, we can use protected storage. Obviously, you're probably going to have some class or some service or some component that has your app state in it with a whole bunch of stuff, not just a single counter. So I'm going to use some of the code from episode 17 to handle the state. All right, in my client, I'm going to add to the shared folder a new Razor component called Cascading App State Provider. Now, I have some things here that are missing. I'm going to use Blazor local storage, which is missing, and also a class called App State. So let's add App State. I've got a counter. I've got time to live in seconds, which I've set to 180 seconds, and then a last accessed. Now, you'll notice that if you watched episode 17, there was a lot more going on here. I've simplified it for the purposes of this demo. Okay, let's add Blazor local storage to this project. Blazor local storage is a library by Chris Sainty that simplifies access to local storage. Now remember, this is local storage, so it's not encrypted, but it doesn't need to be because it's all happening in WebAssembly on the client. There's no transit. This isn't Blazor server, so it doesn't need to be encrypted. So let's go to Program, and we'll add local storage as a service. And while we're at it, let's add that using statement to imports. And we'll take a look at our Cascading App State Provider now. So the first thing we're going to try to do when we load this project or the parameter changes is we're going to use the local storage service to get the app state item with this key. So I load that up into persisted app state, and if it's not null and the date time hasn't elapsed, the time to live in seconds hasn't elapsed, then I'm going to set my app state to it, and when somebody goes to return app state, we get the one that was persisted. Otherwise, we're creating a new app state. Now, in save changes async, this is what we call to persist. So we're setting last access to date time now. That's how we can check it up here. And we're just calling local storage service set item async with the key, saving the app state. So that's really all there is to it. The whole purpose of this cascading item is to provide access to the app state, whether it comes from a saved persisted version or it's brand new. So now let's go to App Razor and wrap the router in the Cascading App State Provider. All I did here was add this top layer, Cascading App State Provider, and then everything in the application will have access to it. So let's go to Counter, change that. Here's our cascading parameter, state provider. So state provider.appstate.counter is the counter property that gets persisted. So once we increment it, then we're going to call save changes. And to display it, we're going to just show state provider app state counter. Let's go to the toolbar. We're going to change this up a little bit. So we've added the cascading app state provider. And when we do an update, we're going to save changes and call update. Now we don't really have to do this because we're assuming that anytime we've touched app state, we're going to save it. So the rest of this is the same. We have our version that calls get version on the timer. And if there's a new version available, we show that in the UI. So before we publish a new one, let's update the version to 1.5. And let's go to index and change that to 1.5 as well. And now we can publish a new one. All right, 1.5 is available, update. And now 1.5 has the app state code in it. So I can go to counter, and now I'm persisting that counter value to app state, along with whatever else is in the app state class. So let's update it to 1.6 and publish another one. And now notice current count is 5. Okay. 1.6 shows up over here. Now what we're looking for is, because the current counter is 5, when we push the update button, we want that counter to stay 5. And it did. And now, to prove this is a new version, we go home, and it's 1.6. Okay, stick around, because now we're moving to PWAs. Those tricky little buggers. Okay, now I have an ASP.NET hosted Blazor WebAssembly application that has also been set up as a PWA. And you know this because you can see the service worker and service worker published, which gets swapped out with the service worker when you're not debugging, you know, when it's published. And I'm going to do the same exact thing that we did in the regular WebAssembly application, which is call an API controller to get the current version. So things are a little bit different in PWA land. First of all, the PWA, aside from Blazor, the whole architecture of it is designed to reload itself automatically. But here's the thing. You have to close it from the browser. You have to close all instances of it. And then you have to wait. There's a waiting period. And all of this is predicated on the fact that the service worker has changed. So here's the service worker. You have to put something like a version in here or something to cause it to change. And then you have to reload it. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in here that I think could be done better. So let's go back to our app settings JSON, and we'll add the version, and we'll add our get version controller over here. Same deal, exactly the same, except the namespace is different. That's it. Okay, now let's go back to the client. Let's start at the index. Our update script is going to be a little bit different. So here's a little trick I learned online to update the location, but using the replace method. Now let's look at the service worker itself. We're going to add a const version, and we need to change that every time we update. But there's a thing that you can do to skip the wait period, and it's just self.skip waiting. And so this means that if we detect any changes, we're not going to go into that waiting period. We should load up the new version. Otherwise, it's going to come from the cache. All right, that's pretty much all the stuff that we need to do in the PWA. And believe me, I looked out there for the PWA version of how to do all this stuff, and it's really complex. And I just wanted to simplify it. So my technique may not be the best. It may not be the PWA accepted way, but it does work. So let's get to the toolbar. So shared toolbar, because let's face it, that was a good idea, moving all that stuff out into the toolbar. And this is just the same as it was before, right? We're calling get version. We're checking to see if it's not the version we got initially, server version. And if there's a new version available, we're saying, yep, that's a new version. But we have this added caveat here, because once we update, we have to close and reopen the application in order to complete the update. So the first thing that happens is we see there's a new version available. Okay, we update. When we update, this reloads and we get a new server version, which is the current version. So this new version available will be false. However, if the server version does not equal the client version, which we have to hard code in here, because how else does the client know what version it is? Okay, I can think of a few ways we can do that, but for now, we're just going to hard code that version right here. So there's now 3 places that we have to change the version. In app settings, in the service worker, and in the toolbar. All right, so let's go to our main layout, and we'll replace this guy with toolbar. And we'll go to the index page, and we'll just change this to Hello 1.0. Okay, now there's 4 places for the purpose of the demo. Let's publish it. Hello 1.0, and look, to get back here quickly, install Update Reload PWA by clicking the Install button. Well, this is a PWA, so let's do it. Click the Install button, and now look at this. Now I've got an icon. So if I close this, there we go, Hello 1.0. All right, so let's publish a new version. First of all, this Hello 1.1, the only reason I have the version in here is just so that you know that we're actually using a new version. You wouldn't have to do this, okay? But we do want to keep track in Toolbar 1.1 and in the Service Worker 1.1 and in App Settings 1.1. All right, let's republish and see what happens. Now, notice that this one says, please reopen the app to complete the update. Okay, so if I do a Control F5 or Control Reload, that one will reload to 1.1. But in the PWA itself, I can press the Update button and boom. How cool is that? In Windows, I've noticed that we don't have to reload the PWA. It's right there. But on an iPhone, for example, if we're in Safari, it will say, please close and reload the app. Now, what about persisting in a PWA? Well, it's exactly the same as persisting state in a regular WebAssembly application, just like we just did. So I'm not going to repeat those steps. However, when you download the code at blazortrain.com, all 3 of these projects will be in the zip file, and I will have the state management stuff in the PWA as well. Back to you in the studio, Carl. You know, with Maui right around the corner, I'm getting very excited to write cross-platform apps with Blazor. I'll be doing lots of Maui content on our sister show, The .NET Show, which you can find at the.netshow.com. Subscribe to me on Twitter at Carl Franklin or DevExpress at DevExpress to be notified of new episodes. Hey, thanks for riding the rails with me today. This is where I jump off. I'll see you next time. Blaze a train!